Okay, it is September 22nd, 2012 by the Gregorian calendar, or Awakat Sikhism, the beginning of Awakat Sikhism, the deer moon, when the hoofed animals are in their rut and mating and reproducing, in the Blackfoot reckoning of time. And I wanted to review a book that I recently read called Ancient Music in the Pines. In Zen, Mind Suddenly Stops, The Way of Effortless Effort by Osho. This is the second book review that I've done for FMK, and I decided to read this book because Osho has been identified by Sifu Freddie Lee as one of the three really spiritually influential individuals in his development. And so I don't know that I'll read many Osho books. I might, but I wanted to read at least one, and then I want to bring influences of my own into this book review process as well. I'm aiming to do at least 100 book reviews in for FMK as part of my own training and development. And so I thought I would look at one of Osho's books. I've never read Osho before. I wasn't very aware of him. It's not the first Zen book that I've read, and but Osho, growing up, I grew up in Western Oregon, and all that I knew of this man was what was portrayed on the news at the time I was growing up, when he was involved with the Rajneesh commune in Eastern Oregon. And so until Sifu Freddy started talking about him, I never really looked into him. And then I have been watching some of the videos of Osho's talks on YouTube, and I found he had good humor and some wise things to say. And so I read this book, and again, in this book, it's the same way. He has a good humor. He has wise things to say, and this, like most of his books, as I understand it, is a collection, a compilation of transcriptions of talks that he gave to his disciples, and his disciples took it upon themselves to record and transcribe and publish these words. And so I do recommend the book, especially if someone has not read much about Zen before. I mean, a lot of this book for me was kind of repetition, although there was of course, some new material and perspectives in there. But it's a good book for someone who is looking into Zen. And I originally, a few days ago, I did record a review of the book, and I hadn't posted it up on YouTube yet when I received an email. And the email that I received seemed to be such an interesting synchronicity with my review, with the timeliness of my review of this book, that I held off on posting my review to do a little bit more thinking, because I thought, what came to me when I got the email was that there was something more here that I was supposed to consider. The email that I received came from this man, This is a man that I know as Tim Buckley. And this was a man who was a primary mentor to me for 4 years of my life. He's the one who originally trained me in cultural anthropology and really set me down the road, in part down the road that would take me to where I am today as a person, and certainly as a person socially situated in the Blackfoot world. Um, I came to Tim, who he was a professor of anthropology at the University of Massachusetts, and I came to him on day one of my training there and told him I wanted to learn um, about being Blackfoot, and that that's what I was interested in. And so he became he was, his own background is in Zazen training and in the study of Yurok spirituality, Yurok religion on the West Coast, Northern California. Yurok is an indigenous culture there. And Tim's email, it was really just kind of an update on his contact information. He was changing his email address, and we've kept in touch over the years. He was such an important figure to my life for the 4 years I was in university, and he was such an influence on who I've become that he's like a father to me, and so I've kept in some touch with him. Probably not as much as I should, but enough that we do keep some correspondence. And what I found also from Tim's email is that since he retired shortly after I finished university. He retired, and he took off on his sailboat. And for a couple of years, he was just sailing the world in his sailboat. But as it turns out, last year he was ordained as a Zen priest in a Japanese tradition, and has since become the director of a Zendo in his home state of Maine, and is doing a lot of teaching as a Zen teacher. And so when I got his email and I learned that Tim had taken this step in his life, and it seemed to be receiving that email was very timely with my review of a Zen book. It started setting me to thinking about what it is with men of Zen in my life, because Tim is not the first of my close male acquaintances to be a long time and very committed practitioner of Zen. And it got me thinking, what is it that, what is the common ground between my reality and these men of Zen who are very close and influential friends of mine. For the most part, over the last 20 years or so, I have most of my close relationships I've developed with people have been within Blackfoot circles. I haven't stepped very far outside of Blackfoot circles in my relational life. It's not because I'm avoiding or because I don't want to be friends with anybody from the outside, but really what I find is that when I engage people from other cultures, and especially the mainstream culture, is I find it hard to relate to them, and I recognize that they don't completely understand me, and so the friendship never gets truly to that close, intimate level. But with men of Zen, this is not the case, and they are among my closest friends, and perhaps even closer to me in some cases than my Blackfoot relationships. And so I wonder what it is. I mean, I don't consider myself to be a a Zen practitioner in the formal sense of it. Um, and I wonder what it is. What is the commonality? What is the common ground? What is the common understanding? What is the attraction between us that allows us to get along so well, myself and men of Zen? And I'm saying men of Zen because particularly I don't have any women of Zen friends. And again, that's not of any of my own choosing or anything like that, or my own biases. It's just that um, that's the way it's gone. I've become close with men who are deeply immersed in Zen. Um, my I do have some. I shy away from the notion or from the concept of meditation a little bit myself in my personal life, and I think for the most part that has been just a misunderstanding on my part of what real meditation is about. And when I look at it, when I look at my life now, um, with a little bit of deeper understanding, I realize that maybe I've been meditating all my life, but initially, um, or and throughout most of my life, I've kind of thought that meditators were missing the boat a little bit, and where I can pinpoint kind of my earliest um, instance of forming that impression was when I was 16 years old, and by then I already had some kind of popular conceptions about what meditation was about. But when I was 16, I toured the southwestern states of the United States, visiting Anasazi ruins and visiting the descendants of those places who are the Hopi and the Pueblo tribes of the American Southwest. And we went to and this was a tour that was guided by naturalists who were affiliated with the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, and it was 6 weeks. We were 6 weeks on the road in a bus and camping out. There wasn't any hotels and that kind of thing, and I lived off of Ichiban noodles and oatmeal and peanut butter and jelly the whole 6 weeks. But any case, something happened along that trip. We went to one of the places that we stopped was Navajo National Monument, and this is not a picture that I took. This is a picture that I grabbed off of the internet of one of the canyons of Navajo National Monument, that kind of looks as I remember the area. Basically, what we were doing was We were there at Navajo National Mall. In Navajo, by the way, are though they're living in the Southwest today. They're not original from there. They're Dene people who migrated south and kind of settled there. So the Navajo are not descendants of the Anasazi, but on their reserve there are Anasazi ruins, and one of the places we wanted to see was this place. It's an old Anasazi ruin called Keet-Seal, and it's a place that's not been touched by the archaeologists, so it's still as it was originally left. But in order to get to Keet-Seal, you have to hike down a canyon and through the canyon, and it's a day-long hike to get out there. And then you have to camp out there and sleep out there, and then see the ruin, and then hike back the next day. Um, so, of our group, not everyone was physically capable of making this kind of 2 day long hike in the summer heat, up and down this very steep and deep canyon to go to Keet-Seal. I was one who was able to do that, but since only some of us were going to do that, we decided the day before that we were going to have kind of a whole group activity that everybody could be engaged in at this place. And so what our guides instructed us to do was to each go out on the rim of the canyon, up on the top, go out somewhere on the rim of the canyon and sit down and just be in this place, and open your senses, observe, listen, smell, and take the place in, be present with the place. And then later on, we would come back together in a few hours, and we would share, while we were having dinner, what we experienced in the place. And so, I walked out onto the canyon rim, and I found a place to sit down and just be present in the canyon. And this was not an exercise I was unfamiliar with. It's something that I had done for many, many hours in other places in my life of my own. It was my own. It wasn't something I was taught. It was something that I just started doing on my own. And so I was very familiar with this exercise, at least in terms of the way that I would do it. But what I noticed was that there was this other kid who was the closest to me on the canyon rim. He was maybe 100 meters away from me, and he had found one of these kind of like balanced rocks, where the sandstone had eroded underneath a harder piece of sandstone, and so it looked like kind of a big rock balanced over off the edge of the canyon rim. And he chose that as his sit spot. And when he sat down, he did one of these. He sat down in kind of this lotus type position, and just like Karma Warrior here, this is another image that I took off the internet. He sat down, and he had, a certain posture, and he closed his eyes, and he began to meditate as I understood meditation to be. And I looked at him from my seat on the canyon rim, and I thought to myself, this guy is totally missing the boat. Because what he's doing, to me, my impression was he's going off into some kind of never land, basically. He's shutting out the experience of the actual canyon. He's closing his eyes. He's closing his senses in a way. Um, Even if he keeps his hearing open, um, it's in the, of course you can't help but sense the wind and these kind of things, but it's different than being really present in that place. I think when you close your eyes and you go into these special postures, and you're concerned with, in a way, where your own thoughts are taking you and these kind of things, and you're trying to let go of mind and whatever's going on when people are in these formal meditations. And to me, I just thought, this guy's completely missing the experience of the canyon. He's not experiencing the canyon. He's in his own little world. And just as I was thinking that, I noticed a cougar, a mountain lion. And the mountain lion walked underneath the balanced boulder that this kid was sitting on. Went from one side and around and back into the other side. And really what would have been the thoughtful thing to do for me would have been to call out to the kid and warn him, there's a mountain lion there. But by that point, like, just seeing him missing the whole thing, missing the whole canyon, to me, I was just gonna wait and see what happened, because I was actually waiting to see the mountain lion pounce up there and make an attempt to eat this kid. And I kind of thought to myself, even though it's not very nice, this would jog this kid back into reality, right? Cougar boy sitting up there on the rock, completely in his own little mental world, in his meditation. If this cougar that he was completely oblivious to, unaware of, jumped up and tried to eat him, even though it might be the last lesson he ever received, it's an important lesson. And so I didn't say anything. I waited and watched, and the mountain lion never did jump up and try to eat him. But for me, the presence of the mountain lion just confirmed my understanding of the problematics around formal meditation, the problems with it, where people are tuning out their environment. I mean, the kid never realized, never had a clue that this mountain lion was there. And because he wasn't really being in that place, he was being in some mental place. And as I was reading Osho's book, I came across something in a way similar to this, that he wrote about. Now, on pages 56 and 57, I'll just read a couple of excerpts from that, because it relates to this idea. It says in there, relax into yourself. Just close your eyes and listen to all that is happening all around. No need to feel anything as a distraction. The moment you feel it is a distraction, you are denying godliness, existence. This moment, existence has come to you as a bird. Don't deny. It has knocked at your doors as a bird. The next moment it has come as a dog, barking. or as a child crying and weeping, or as a madman laughing. Don't deny, don't reject, accept. Because if you deny, you will become tense. All denials create tension. Accept. If you want to relax, acceptance is the way. Accept whatsoever is happening all around. Let it become an organic whole. It is. You may know it, you may not know it, but everything is interrelated. Once it happened that it was spring. The weather was delightful, and I was sitting on a park bench. I was enjoying the spring, the birds, the air, and the sun. I was listening to the melodious chirping of numerous birds. A stranger was also sitting on the same bench. I turned to him and said to him, "Is not the music of the birds delightful?" But he must have been a religious man. He was doing some mantra. He felt disturbed. He felt as if I had interfered. He scowled and said, "How the devil can I hear what you are saying over the damn noise of those stupid birds?" But if you are doing some stupid mantra, you will think these birds are stupid. If you are repeating some nonsense within you or thinking some trivia, you may call it philosophy, religion, then these birds become distractions. Their sounds are simply divine. They don't say anything. They are simply bubbling with delight. Their song has no meaning except an overflowing of energy. They want to share with existence, with the trees, with the flowers, with you. They have nothing to say. They are just there themselves. Okay, so in that excerpt, I think Osho shares partially my perception of Cougar Boy, because what I saw in Cougar Boy was the same thing. That he was in his own mental space. There was something going on there in his meditation where he was not actually aware of what was going on around him. And I've seen this with lots of students as well, in the meditative form that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes here. But the closing off of people that are trying to practice spirituality, who are closing off reality from their experience, are missing the point, right? That's what I saw in Cougar Boy. But there's aspects of what Osho had to say there in that excerpt regarding his interpretation of the animals, the birds, and what they were doing that I totally disagree with, but I'll get to that. In any case, I recognize in Osho that that he sees this as a problem, that he sees people tuning out reality as an issue, and that has always been the thing for me that has kept me kind of distant from any kind of formal meditative practice in systems that have come from the East, because of the formalism of it, which I think would be a distraction from engaging with reality. The way I grew up was in kind of a full engagement with reality. This is one of my childhood pictures. I'm probably like 13 years old here, 14 years old or whatever. My little brother up on the rock and going for a swim in the river, diving in the ice cold mountain river. The way I grew up was full immersion in the outdoors, in nature. And there was an event that happened when I was 12 years old that was really formative to me in terms of my, how I relate to and engage with nature. But yeah, in any case, my way has always been this kind of active involvement with it. in a way that you need to be fully perceptive, fully aware of what's going on around you in the environment, um, in order to be safely engaged with it. And um, and and really going along with the flow of nature. You know, I started learning um, how to fish and how to find wild foods and things like this as a very young person. By the time I was 17, I was teaching um, these skills to like college students, and it reminds me of a kind of a one of the Zen lessons that you hear very often, and that Osho does touch on in his book as well. Um, in his book, I think on page 69 and 70, he writes about this. He says, "You swim in water. You go to the river and swim. What do? You trust water. A good swimmer trusts so much that he almost becomes one with the river. He is not fighting. He does not grab the water. He is not stiff and tense. If you are stiff and tense, you will be drowned. If you are relaxed, the river takes care. That's why whenever somebody dies, the body floats on the water. This is a miracle, amazing. Alive, the person died and was drowned by the river, but dead, the person simply floats on the surface. What has happened? The dead person knows some secret about the river which the alive person did not know. The alive person was fighting. The river was the enemy. He was afraid. He could not trust. But the dead person, not being there, how could he fight? The dead person is totally relaxed, and with no tension, suddenly the body surfaces. The river takes care. No river can drown a dead person. Surrender means to live the same way in life as a good swimmer swims in the river. Life is a river. Either you can fight or you can float. Either you can push the river and try to go against the current, or you can float with the river and go wherever the river leads you. Surrender is not towards somebody, it is simply a way of life. A God is not needed to surrender to. There are religions which believe in God, there are religions which don't believe in any God. But all religions believe in surrender, so surrender is the real God. The Christian teaches surrender to God. God is just an excuse to surrender. It is a help because it will be difficult for you to surrender without any object. So I relate to that in several ways. That kind of surrender to me did not come through any formal religion. I've never attended church in my life. I'm now involved heavily in Blackfoot spiritual practices, traditional Blackfoot practices. But growing up, I was never involved in a church in my life. Rather, this place was my church growing up, my primary church. This, of course, I'm an adult, and I'm still, when I go to Western Oregon, I still visit this place. Something happened to me here at this place in this photograph when I was 12 that totally changed my perception of reality. And I could basically see through the cultural layering of development we had tried to put on this place to mask it from what it is, and from the life that comes out of this place and that has always been here, and us as a part of that life. And when I had the experience that I had when I was 12, um, it so shook me that I had to keep coming back. And so I spent probably, I don't know, many hours, many hundreds of hours of my life in this place, in this field, in the forest behind this field with this tree. And there was a hawk here, and the hawk um, it recognized me, and as soon as I came near this place, it would come and greet me. And the hawk is the one that I surrendered to, and I would ask the hawk, almost in prayer, to lead me and show me what I was there to learn that day. And wherever the hawk went was where I would walk to. And sometimes I would walk for many miles, into the next county, into the next town. The area where I grew up was mostly like old growth forest. Most of it has been cut down here. Like in this picture, this was not how it looked when I was growing up. When I was growing up, this big madrone tree here, which also played a large part in my own kind of spiritual development. This big madrone tree was kind of embedded in the edge of the old growth forest, and since then a lot of that has been cut back, and actually in the last few years, this madrone tree is no longer either. Somebody cut it down. But yeah, this was an important place for me to come to appreciate the life system. Someone might say it's like the the oneness of life and all of this, but my relatedness as a human being to the broader scope of ecological life. This is where I learned it to start off with, and since I was 12 years old, I've continued to do this. Go to places where just natural places that are more like my church than any kind of man-made place could ever be. And this is where I get my spiritual training. And this is where I get what I think is my meditation. And there was one excerpt in from the Osho book that kind of reminded me of what comes in these places for me. On page 59, he writes, "Once meditation settles in you and you fall into rhythm with existence, compassion is a consequence. Suddenly you feel you are in love with the whole, and the other is no longer the other. In the other also you live, and the tree is no longer just that tree there. Somehow it is related to you. Everything becomes interrelated. You touch a blade of grass, and you have touched all the stars, because everything is related. It cannot be otherwise. Existence is organic. It is one. It is a unity." And this is part of what I got from my own personal training as a young boy being out here. But I've developed that ever since. So for almost 3 decades now, I've been involved in the practice of spending a good amount of time visiting places where I can be in meditation, in a sense. And in the last maybe 5 years or so, I have come up with a system for teaching this to others, and I offer it as a course in the college where I teach, and to get people connected to this life system. And I've kind of developed a methodology for bringing people to that, to the kind of relatedness to nature that I have. And the way that I do it is kind of over the course of a year, 2 years, I take them through a series of processes. The first thing that I do is I tell people to find a spot near their homes that they can go and they can visit in any kind of weather, and a natural spot. It doesn't have to be, some place that's completely untouched by humans or anything like that. It can even be, a neighborhood. Really, if you're in an urban area, there's plenty of nature there in even the most urban areas. But I tell them, find this spot. When you find the spot that you're going to be spending time in, you go out there and make an offering. And this is one form of offering here that you're seeing in this photograph. This is an offering that I made at one of the places that I visit. And the idea for this offering came to me in a dream, where I was basically instructed this was the offering that I would make. But really, this is a representation of kind of like a shedding of the skin, and it's symbolic. It's a symbolic offering. But ultimately, what I try to guide people towards are real offerings rather than symbolic offerings like this. I mean, in Blackfoot culture here, our understanding is that we don't own anything. Nothing that we have is owned. It's something that we're using for the time being. So even our own bodies, we don't own them. Eventually, we give them back to the life system. And when something wears out, when your clothes are worn down and these kind of things, something that you use is worn out, you give it back to the life system. You give it back into the land, and have it go back in to feed new life. So everything that's old, I mean, even when I get a haircut or I trim my nails, I keep that hair and those nails and I bring them out and I leave them as offering to give them back to the life system. To me, it's very disturbing that knowing that when I die, there are rules that the mainstream society has established for what's going to happen with my body. Because for me, it's very important. I want my body to feed life. But the mainstream culture treats the human body as a biohazard. And they want to either burn up that energy in a fire, or they want to entomb that energy in concrete and steel, where it's not going to go back to the life system. And that's something that's very disturbing to me. I mean, it's even disturbing to me that but I do work around it. that we don't give anything back really in the mainstream system. Everything everything gets put into trash containers and brought to a central location and processed at that location at a dump. To me, littering is not littering. For instance, some people look at littering and they say that's environmentally, that's terrible stuff. To me, that's the reality. That's actually being in reality. Is you put that what you've used back on the land. The problem is that we are such consumers that we have so much litter that we could quickly cover the life system with our litter. We're producing way too much, so way too much trash. So all of this are problems with the way that we're living that I recognize out of my system of understanding of life that I ascribe to. But basically, the understanding that we don't own anything. So if something wears out, you let it go like a shed skin, and then you go seek the new. So this is one kind of offering. Another kind of offering, which is the one that I try to guide my students towards ultimately, is to feed the life directly from your food, to sacrifice your food to give to life, and so this, what I'm literally talking about, is feeding plants and animals, and this can be something as simple as human waste and where human waste should go. Why are we putting why do we urinate in toilets when urine is not a biohazard in any way? When urine is just the nutrients that your body can't absorb because it already has enough of them, so it flushes them out of your system, and it's largely water and nutrients that could go towards feeding the life system. If instead of pissing in the toilet, you went in your backyard or what have you. It can be as simple as that, but it can be never throw away any food. When there's food that you might throw away, like a rotten fruit or something like that, don't put it in the garbage can. Take it outside and leave it outside to go back into the life system. When there's meat, bring it outside and feed it to the birds. Feeding the life, and that's what I'm talking about even with my body. And I go to extremes. Here in this picture you see a couple of magpies. I've made many friends with magpies. These are two young fledgling magpies, and I'm letting them actually eat my flesh. They actually tear flesh from my legs as an offering to them. So this is the kind of extreme that I go to, but I'm not promoting that everybody has to go to this extreme, but I'm saying that step one to really engaging with place is to start making offerings. Make offerings of the things that you're done with, that are used up, that need to go back into the life system, and make offerings in terms of sacrificing your food, the food that the food that you're not going to waste, instead of wasting it, feed it to the life system. So this is step one that I tell my students: go to your place and make an offering and speak to the plants and animals of that place and tell them your intentions, what you're going to be doing here, that you're coming here to learn, really how to be a full human being from them. And then start visiting your place. Start visiting, and visit with a certain frequency. Every time you go there, spend maybe 2 to 3 hours to start off with. What I find is somebody spends 1 hour in their place, they don't really get much from the place, because when you come in, you're a stranger there, basically. And it's just like if you go visit somebody at their home, even if you know them, when you come in, there's a period of small talk and settling in and stuff before you can really get into any kind of intimacy, to any real kind of sharing closely. And so this is the same way with a place. When you go there, you have to spend some actual time there before that place starts opening up to you, and you start really opening up to that place. So I recommend to my students, I tell them they have to spend at least 5 hours a week at their sites, which means they have to go visit it twice a week and spend 2 to 3 hours on each visit. They can do more if they want than 5 hours, but I recommend they start with 2 to 3 hours per visit, because that's when you start. After the first hour, the animals will start coming out for you, and you'll start noticing things that you don't notice otherwise. And so this is kind of step 2, to visit regularly and with a certain frequency. And step 3 is to really come to know all the residents of your place. And for this, you need names, you need labels. And this is where language comes in and mind comes in, because although ultimately it's released, that mental stuff is released in a sense, you need it to get to know the place. It's just like with people. To really form a close bond with somebody, you need to know their name. That's a key part of intimacy. And the name doesn't really mean anything. It's just a label. It's just a label that's stuck to whatever this is. So I tell my students, go around your place and who do you recognize that's there, and who don't you recognize? And those ones that you don't recognize, you need to learn their names, because in learning their names, then you're going to pay attention to them. It's like I relate it to teaching. When I'm teaching students, if I have a classroom of 30 students and there's some students whose names I don't bother to learn, then I don't really become a good teacher for them, because I don't pay attention to them. Without knowing their names, I don't really pay attention to them and how they're progressing, and I don't do my best job as a teacher for them. And it's just the way it is. We need names in this regard, but the names don't have to actually mean anything. But they're just a label to attach to them so that we start paying attention. The names, the labels allow us to direct our attention to them. And so once you have names, once you start learning names of things, then when you visit your site, when you visit your place, you ask the question of these ones that you've come to know, to identify. You ask them, what's happening here today? And you try to get to learn what's going on there at the time of your visit, because every time you visit there's something different happening. The world is constantly everything is constantly in change, everything is constantly in motion, and there's a cyclical kind of a cycling to that change and motion. But every day you visit is going to be different, and so you ask what's going on this day. When I come across these birds, these are flickers, mikanaki soi, is what they're called in Blackfoot, northern flickers. These are two males, and they've just shown up. This picture was taken at the early in the summer season, and the two males have just shown up. They've arrived. They migrated in before the females, and these two males are dancing and singing and doing what they call jousting. What ornithologists call jousting, but basically they're trying to establish their territories. And when the females come in, they're going to choose the males who have the territories that they like. They're not really fighting, so jousting isn't really the best word for it, but they're dancing, and they are competing in a sense for the territory. They're trying to intimidate one another out of particular trees and particular areas of the forest and this kind of a thing. So when I read, like in Osho, and he says the birds aren't actually saying anything, their songs don't have any meaning, they're just bubbling with delight and this kind of a thing. He's wrong about that. Everything that the birds do, everything that the animals are doing has meaning. It has meaning. It has specific meaning. What doesn't have as much meaning as we think it does is our words. We think our words have a lot of meaning. We think our words, our languages, are so much more than what these animals are doing, and in truth they're not. Like I was saying with names, the names are just labels. They're really meaningless in themselves, but we need the labels in order to pay attention. There's many other aspects of our language that we use similarly, where the words, although we ascribe meaning to them, they actually don't have meaning, and they're just ways for us to use language to posture in ways similar to these flickers, for instance. We're conveying things with our language like they convey through their songs. The actual words don't matter as much as the singing of it. And for instance, recently I was at this hotel, and fairly late at night I walked outside, and there was this young couple sitting outside on some steps, and they were just talking to them amongst themselves, a guy and a girl. And up above them, on the steps on the next floor, some man came out, and the man was in a suit, and he called down to them, to the young couple. He said, "Hey, how's it going?" And they said, "Good." And then the man said, "Is everything okay down there?" And basically, at that point, I recognized what the man was doing, which was he was kind of taking on an authoritarian type of a role. He saw young people outside, and it was nighttime, and he wanted to investigate and find out what's going on with these young people outside. And maybe he needs to tell them to get lost or something. So he says, "Is everything okay down there?" And the way that they answered was a little more shyly. They said, "Yeah, everything's okay." And then that wasn't even enough for this guy, this suit guy. He had to come walk down between them. And he walked down the stairs, he went between them, and then he noticed me there. Prior to that, he hadn't noticed me. And then he kind of looked at me with a little bit of surprise, and he said, "Hey, how's it going?" And I gave him a look that told him that I knew exactly what he was up to. And I said, "I'm fine, how are you?" And he said, "Good." And he went in a door and he left. And he didn't bother those two anymore. But there was a number of, little language things exchanged there. All these "how are yous" and "is everything okay" and "yes, it's good" and "fine, how are you" and all of these things. They were completely meaningless. All it was all that went on was what really went on was posturing and displays, social displays, much like these birds are doing. So we may think that the birds' songs have no meaning. Some people might think that the birds' songs have no meaning, that they're just expressing joy and all this stuff. It's not that. It's not that that's what they're doing. They're expressing the same things that we express. We use our language, and we deceive ourselves into believing our language is something more than this. But there's there is far more to what they're doing than just bubbling with delight. These two birds are really contesting with one another who's going to have claim to that place. So when you know animals, then you recognize these things, and then you can see the flaws in some of the formal training in spirituality that comes from these systems that don't appreciate nature in its fullest, that are kind of human-centric systems. So, I tell my students to go out and ask the ones that they know there what's happening here today, and they learn what's going on there today. And then I tell them as a next stage that you have to do it in different ways. Sometimes you have to sit. You need to go out and just sit still. Sometimes you need to go out and walk around your place. If you sit still for 2 hours, you're going to get into a much deeper conversation with the ones that are right there where you're sitting than you would if you're walking around the whole time, because you have 2 or 3 hours to sit there and converse with them. At the same time, though, if you just always just sit like that for a few hours, then you don't get the broader scope of what's happening there that day. So, maybe once a week, sit still. Maybe once a week, walk around. In all cases, you have to really open your senses, right? You really use your eyes. Don't be like Cougar Boy and close your eyes. Coyote's not going to close his eyes, even though his sense of smell is his strongest sense, even though his ears are very sensitive. He's not going to close his eyes. He's not going to close anything, right? None of the animals are. They don't do that. They don't do that thing, that game that the meditators of our culture play, and the spiritual, the religious folks play, where they try to close off some of their senses. Um, Osho in his book, I think he talks about this. I forget the page that he's talking about something similar. He talks about somebody who's fasting, and I thought it was kind of funny because he's right on the dot with the fasting thing in my view. It's on page 136. He says, there are similar methods to paralyze the mind. You can fast, then the mind goes on saying that the body is hungry, but you don't supply food. You don't listen to the mind. By and by, the mind becomes dull. The body goes on feeling the hunger, but the mind does not report it because what is the point? There is nobody listening. There is nobody to respond. Then a certain paralysis happens to the mind. Many people who go on long fasts think they have attained meditation. It is not meditation. It is just low energy, paralysis, insensitivity. They are moving like dead corpses. They are not alive. And that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. You gotta actually be alive in this place and not closing off to it. So depriving yourself of food is what he's talking about. I'm talking about depriving your sense of yourself of the full sensory experience of being in the place, which means keep your eyes open and keep your mind on actually what's going on there, not on these things that the religion tells you you're supposed to be thinking about to get yourself into a meditative state. The mind, although, in the title of this book is talking about no mind, and in lots of Zen they talk about no mind, the mind is necessary, but you have to know the mind. You have to understand the mind, I think. To attempt to have the no mind thing completely is a wrongful method in my book. I know what they're talking about, and I'm getting to that as well here in this review. But it can be misleading to kind of dismiss the importance of the mind, because the mind is important. But anyway, do different methods. Sometimes sit, sometimes walk. Always use your senses. And then as a next stage, as a really important next stage, start engaging with the place as a human being. So, these animals and all this other life that's out here, they don't come out here to try to sit in meditation and such, although I see them as being in a meditative state almost their entire lives, being in awareness, but they live out here, and we also should fit. We're of this earth, we're of these places, and our contemporary culture, one of its biggest downfalls is that, and what's making it unsustainable, is that we're not engaging with reality as human beings. And so I tell my students, especially the year 2 students, once they've gone through a year of this kind of training and practice, to start engaging with the place as a human being. And that means feeding from the place. That means when the berries are ripe, you respond. And that respond that ability to respond is really, in my understanding, a big part of what being in a real meditative state is about. That you're able to respond accurately to what's happening right now. And you don't really have to think about it too much or even at all, because when you think, you're getting locked up. And this is where martial arts and Zen merge, because in martial arts, if you spend too much time thinking when you're in the fighting scenario, then you just end up paralyzing yourself, and you lose, and you can lose your life. Similarly, I think as a society, we are heading towards losing our life, or as a species, we're heading towards losing our species life, because we are not responding to reality, because we are paralyzed, because we can have fruit growing in our backyards naturally, a local abundance, and yet we could go to the grocery store and expend all kinds of crazy energy working for all week long to be able to go to the grocery store to buy the things that are going to keep our bodies fueled, the food, when it's all around us all the time, if we only learned how to respond and engage with the environment. So I teach my students in year 2 traditional foods, eating, living off the environment, not only eating, but water. I teach them how to get water. And these are the key things: food and water. And in order to get good food and good water, you have to be responding to what's going on in the environment now. You can't say, I'm gonna go hunt this particular animal today or on June 25th, and I'm going to go pick my berries on July 4th and what have you. What you have to do is go out there, and what's, hopefully by then, but in your training, what's going on, what's coming into season, what you're most likely going to encounter, and you go prepared to be able to engage with that place as a human being, and feed off that place. And in that sense, you're kind of bringing the whole experience back to stage 1, because remember, at the beginning I told my students, you go and feed the place. In the end, the place is going to feed you. And this is the way that the animals live. Life is really fast-paced in nature. It's always changing. Life and death is happening all the time. But it's cyclical. There's certain times when the osprey comes to visit my pond and fish for pike. Certain time of the year, it comes back. There is a repetition to the life system. And within that repetition, if you're engaged with the fast-paced reality, you never get bored. And one of the things I was reading in Osho, one of the things that kind of struck me, where he was again on the mark, but yet in my opinion also a little bit off the mark, where in these passages from page 78 and page 80, where he's advising one of his disciples on boredom. He says, so the real thing is to understand boredom, not restlessness. Boredom is a very, very significant phenomenon. Only man feels bored, no other animal. You cannot make a buffalo bored. Impossible. Only man gets bored because only man is conscious. Consciousness is the cause. The more sensitive you are, the more bored you will become. Boredom is an indication of sensitivity. Trees are not bored, animals are not bored, rocks are not bored, because they are not sensitive enough. This has to be one of the basic understandings about your boredom, that you are sensitive. But Buddhas are not bored. You cannot bore a Buddha. Animals are not bored, and Buddhas are not bored. Boredom is the consciousness of repetition. Because animals cannot remember the past, they cannot feel bored. They cannot remember the past, so they cannot feel the repetition. Hence, people try to change. They move into a new house, they bring a new car home, they divorce the old husband, they find a new love affair. But again, that thing is going to become repetitive sooner or later. Changing places, changing persons, changing partners, changing houses is not going to do anything, and whenever a society becomes very bored, people start moving from one town to another, from one job to another, from one wife to another, but sooner or later they realize that this is all nonsense, because the same thing is going to happen again and again with every woman, with every man, with every house, with every car. Alright, so there, like I'm saying, I agree with Osho and I disagree with Osho. Osho, to me, obviously does not know animals well. If he knew animals well, he would not say that they lack consciousness, and he would not say that they lack memory, and that they're not sensitive, and so they don't see the repetition. This osprey here in this picture comes to the pond at a certain time of year, every year, and hunts only pike, day in and day out. It eats only fish. Its 100% diet is fish. And it does have memory. It remembers every year to come to the pond to fish at this certain time, when it knows it's going to get the fish there. And to me, what's going on with Osho there is that he's being informed by his culture, his cultural influences, and maybe his Eastern cultural influences. But it doesn't really matter to me, because it's the same thing with Western mainstream cultural influences, is that they diminish the animals and think of them as less than human beings. And to me, that's just completely off the mark. What's really going on with boredom is not that, in my mind, in my estimation, what's really not going on with boredom is that we're too sensitive. That's not the case. And it's certainly not that the animals don't get bored because they are insensitive. If you know animals, you will know that they're sensitive. I know animals well, and I know that they have all the same sensitivity and far more than we have. And they are motivated by the same emotive things that we have. That we have love, we have fear, we have anger, we have all of these kind of emotive things. They have all of that. They have really complex societies. They feel all the stuff that we do, and I think the reason that our broader cultures, whether they be Eastern culture or Western cultures, try to diminish this is because it's an excuse. It's a reason, the rationalization for our dealing with killing animals that we have to do to live. If we recognize that they are every bit like us, then it's really hard to eat animals. But the truth of it is that they're every bit like us in terms of their emotive stuff and their sensitivities. Even an insect. There's a mama giant water bug, and this mama is watching over her eggs. Even in the insect world, they have this stuff. They are highly sensitive, highly aware, and you can see this in some more than others. I think they all have it, but I think in some we're closer to, in terms of our own development, that we recognize it more in them. So a lot of people talk about the intelligence of animals like dolphins or whales or crows, and these are highly sensitive beings. If you get to know a bird like a crow, then you'll know that in their environment, they know every little nuance. Every little nuance. They are so highly aware, we're not even close to having their level of sensitivity and awareness. We're not developed with that yet. And we won't get there unless as a species we start practicing to get there, to develop our sensitivities and awarenesses. The crow knows everything that's going on in his environment. He knows every little nuance. He has the whole place memorized. He certainly knows patterns and repetitions. He doesn't get bored because there is constant little changes going on all the time. And I think he doesn't get bored because he's constantly engaged in this awareness endeavor itself. This being aware is what keeps you from boredom. I think the reason that our members of our contemporary society fall into boredom is not because they're more sensitive than the animals and then they sense this repetition and then they get bored with the repetition. I think that's not the case. I think the reason that they get bored is because they're not engaged in an active practice that is developing high awareness in themselves. And so they don't see the amazing things that are happening around them all the time. They're walking through this world like zombies. And to them, the world is very boring because they don't see it, they don't sense it. Like Cougar Boy, they've closed their eyes. When you open your eyes, that's when life stops being boring and you start having miracles happen, where you have you develop relationships with all kinds of other species, and you develop compassion. And this, in terms of meditation and compassion, this is one of the areas where I totally agree with what Osho has to say. He talks about meditation and compassion on page 53. He writes, "The first thing to be remembered continuously is that compassion cannot be practiced. It is this point where all the followers of the great religious teachers have missed. Buddha attained compassion through meditation. Now Buddhists go on practicing compassion. Jesus attained compassion through meditation, but Christians, the Christian missionaries, go on practicing love, compassion, service to humanity. But their compassion has proved to be a very destructive force in the world. Their compassion has created only wars. Their compassion has destroyed millions of people. They end up in deep imprisonments. Compassion frees you, gives you freedom, but that compassion has to come only through meditation. There is no other way to it. Buddha has said that compassion is a byproduct, a consequence. You cannot catch hold of the consequence directly. You have to move. You have to produce the cause, and the effect follows. and that I completely agree with. I mean, at least what I'm doing and what I've been doing for the majority of my life outdoors, engaging with these places, is, I think, a form of meditation. You know, now I see it as a form of meditation. Used to be that word meditation had all those silly connotations attached to it for me. But if I'm looking at what I think is going on in Zen, what I'm doing is meditation, and through that meditation comes compassion. It comes compassion for the other species. It comes relatability with them, and you know, the problems that I see with the mainstream cultures, both Eastern and West, is that their compassion is focused only on other human beings for the large part. I mean, I shouldn't say only, because it's not the case, but for the large part, they're still, and for the reason I already stated, because we have to kill animals, then they rationalize it by putting animals, diminishing their significance, and that carries into their compassion as well. So they don't become compassionate enough, in my book, about other species. If they really believed in the oneness, in the whole of life, that we're all part of the same, and that we're all related, then they would not make these silly distinctions between humans and animals. And given that there's many more animals and plants out there than there are humans, a lot of their compassion would go in that direction, and it's not. And but I think, you know, through awareness training in nature, compassion does naturally develop. I think Osho's on the mark about that. And out of that compassion comes, in a sense, reason to fight. It comes reason to fight, because when you see, as we are today, the life system being attacked, even though that's the current, even though that seems to be the flow of the river at the moment, I still feel compelled to fight. I feel compelled to swim against the current, because the current is a zombie current. It's a death current. That's what it's taking us toward, is the not good. It's the death current. I think when you recognize the life system, you can swim with the life current and fight against the death current. And so I don't think you have to look at what's going on. If your reality is solely based on what human beings are doing and what's the trend with humans, and that's the current that you think you have to go with, you're missing the broader reality, the broader movement of the life system, and that human current, what's going on with the human world right now, is largely the death current. And so my recommendation would be to get with the life current, to get with the nature current, to get with the current of the life system, and fight against the death current. Fight against the things that are trying to kill the life system. And so I see at some points, when the life system is threatened in the way that it is today, that fighting that trend is important too. And so, you know, ultimately, these are the things that came to mind as I was reading Osho's book for me, and my sense of trying to relate to what Osho had to share, and um, relating Zen to my own life and trying to make sense of what it is, how is it, you know. And I was reminded of this by Tim's email, but what is the common grounds between how I live and what I do, and 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 Zen, because there's something there. There's something there that allows enough common ground that my closest, a lot of, some of my closest relationships are with practitioners of Zen, formal practitioners of Zen. So, and I think, you know, part of that is that in a way I'm engaged in that Zen practice, even though I don't call it that, even though I don't call it meditation, even though I don't have any of this formal training, that um, my engagement with the natural world has led me on some of the same kind of journey that people who are involved in Zen are on. So those are my thoughts and the impressions that came to me from reading the book. It's very personal. Anybody that reads this book is going to get their own from it.